Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, California voters weighed in on a host of issues, including education, marijuana, and the death penalty. We'll analyze the winners and losers. Also, political and racial themes have long been part of the arts. We'll look at how they're playing out in the Bay Area art scene. Plus, NFL Hall of Famer Steve Young talks about his successes and challenges, both personal and professional. But first, thousands of high school and college students have been staging walkouts and protests, reflecting similar demonstrations nationwide in the wake of Donald Trump's presidential victory. Mr. Trump and President Obama held their first face-to-face meeting this week. Both are calling for unity. It's unclear when that will happen. The election has exposed deep divisions on race, class, and economic opportunity. And joining me now with a look at what's next is PBS NewsHour correspondent Lisa Desjardins. Lisa, nice to have you with us again.
Oh, I'm glad to be back.
All right, what policy moves are we likely to see in the next year or so, now that Republicans are in control of the presidency and the House and the Senate in Congress?
Donald Trump has certainly said what he wants to start off working on. That includes his wall with Mexico. Hopefully we'll see a plan from him on exactly how his payment mechanism would work. But another one is Obamacare. President-elect Trump has said that he does want to repeal and replace Obamacare. That's something House and Senate Republicans want too. The question is exactly how would they do it? We expect those two to be initial. And then the third thing is something I think we have to watch right away, which is who would President-elect Trump appoint to the Supreme Court, to Justice Scalia's vacant spot.
Certainly, there's been much speculation about that. He's also talked about cutting taxes, shrinking some government programs. How will Donald Trump translate this popular uprising into actually governing?
Right. I think that he has got to bring around him people who have experience here in Washington. We know one thing, his transition team, both campaigns had transition teams in place, but Trump's transition team actually has been working longer and has a bigger staff than Hillary Clinton's did. So they have been looking actually at literal resumes for months for the 4,000 political jobs that he has to fill. They've had a good start to that, but we'll see in the next few months exactly what direction he goes in. Does he pick more experienced people, or does he go with people from, say, the business world? So political versus business experience, we'll be watching.
Lisa, I also want to ask you about the Democratic Party. We're now having a conversation about the Democratic Party that Republicans had not too long ago, right? They lost a lot of working class white voters in this election. Now there's a struggle for the soul and direction of the party. How do they make themselves relevant again?
I think they have to look at a few things. One is how they work with unions and how relevant are unions today. Unions are out kind of in the fight for their lives right now. But even as unions are closely allied for the most part with the Democratic Party, most union workers are very concerned about trade. That is something that Democrats were not out in front of. That is something that Donald Trump was clearly going on the attack about all year, and it seems to have swayed a lot of these union and non-union working class voters. Trade is a big issue that Democrats have to figure out how they get their message across and what that message is, frankly.
And just real quickly, do you think the Democratic Party will move a little further to the left to try to get more younger minority voters, especially those inspired by Bernie Sanders?
I think the survivors of 2016 would like to see the Democratic Party move more to the left. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure if that's going to happen. I think we have to watch closely.
All right, Lisa Desjardins, I know it's been a busy week for you, and we appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
Turning now to state politics, Californians voted on 17 ballot measures and sent some pretty clear messages about their priorities this week. They voted to legalize pot and tighten gun control, but kept the death penalty in place. Voters approved more resources for schools and hospitals and dealt a resounding blow to tobacco companies. Here now to discuss local and state elections, as well as the impact of a Trump presidency on California politics, are University of San Francisco professor James Taylor, KQED senior editor of California Politics and Government, Scott Shafer, and Republican political strategist Sean Walsh. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Sean, how did the Trump factor play out in California? Before the election, there were predictions that he might hurt Republicans down ballot in the Central Valley in Southern California. Did all of that come into play?
I don't think Trump was that much of a factor in California, except for the fact that people thought that there was going to be a veto-proof majority in the Assembly and the Senate, and that did not come to pass. Right now, the Republicans maintained one seat, so now Jerry Brown can't run roughshod over the Democrats over the legislature.
And this is to all of you. There have been protests nationwide, students throughout the Bay Area taking to the streets as other protests are happening nationally as well. Are we seeing the beginning of a possible national movement here?
I think it's too soon to say. I mean, I think obviously, I think many of the protesters were Latino and were maybe objecting and voicing their concerns about immigration policy, deportation, that kind of thing. I would be curious to know. I mean, given that the turnout of millennial voters was fairly low, you know, I would love to know how active they were in the run-up to the election. But I think it's too soon to say if it's going to be a national movement. I mean, if it continues to play out, and we'll see what kind of president Trump is. We don't really know the answer to that yet either.
No, I agree with Scott. But I look at social movements as a part of my research, and it's really interesting as we look at this reaction. I think you have to sort of attach it to the already existing movements or semi-movements or micro-movements, if you want to call them, going back all the way to Occupy, more recently here in California, the Oscar Grant movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, which are all local California movements. And so I think you could see, of course, California is getting the national attention right now in the reaction to Trump. It's Oakland and San Francisco, almost predictably, but we certainly see young people still committed on these activities.
And looking down the line, how is Trump's victory what effect is Trump's victory likely to have in California's gubernatorial race 2 years from now? Antonio Villaraigosa, former Los Angeles mayor, just announced today he's running.
Right. Well, I think at this point, today, a few days after the election, Democrats are dispirited, they're depressed. They're wandering around, wondering like who's going to lead them out of the wilderness. And my guess is, of course, again, we don't know what the mood will be like in 2 years, but my guess is that Democrats will be looking for someone who's charismatic, somebody who's motivational, someone who has sort of seen as a fighter, not someone who is too close to business. And among the people in the race now, and that would include John Chung, the treasurer, Villaraigosa, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, all Democrats. I would have to give the edge to Newsom. He also was very supportive of the gun control measure. That was his measure, as well as took a high-profile lead with marijuana. So I think he's well positioned. But politics is a funny thing. You can't really predict where things are going to be in 2 or 3 years.
Sean, what about Tom Steyer? Where does he stand in all this?
Tom Steyer is one of the big losers, in my view, for this election cycle. This is the second election cycle where he has spent literally tens of millions of dollars to try and impact the elections in California as well as nationally. And it looks like, again, this year he failed miserably.
He actually told KQED this week that he was now reconsidering running for governor. He had been looking like he was going to run. Now he's having second thoughts.
And I think, Scott, an important thing to note and why Trump won is a lot of the industrial policy issues and jobs and economy issues were very, very impactful. And his message of climate change and environment at kind of all costs, I think, is going a little bit away from the current of where a lot of working class Democrats and labor household members, not labor leadership members, are. So I think he'd have real trouble if he ran for governor with labor Democrats.
Interesting. I think one other impact too. I think if Hillary Clinton had won, a number of Democrats in California might have gone with her to the White House. Dianne Feinstein's name was mentioned as a top possible cabinet member, and that would have opened up a whole other scramble. That's not going to happen now. So there are fewer places to move to if you're a Democrat.
James, let's talk about some of the statewide propositions. Pot, cigarette tax, gun control, looser parole rules. What passed, what didn't, and what does this tell us about where California's at now?
Yeah, and when you look at the death penalty, you look at marijuana, you look at soda, you look at cigarettes, you look at the condoms, we're all over the place. It seems like we mostly took a liberal position on most of these positions, but the death penalty obviously counterbalances any of the sort of liberal policy orientations you see in the electorate. The death penalty spoke loud and clear and sort of echoed the Trump moment or cultural phenomena. I think, again, one word we haven't talked about is culture, and I think what Trump tapped into on a national level was some sort of cultural dimension. But clearly here in California, the death penalty resonates with Trump's general aura, but I imagine that Trump, like you say, is probably neutral on the death penalty like he is on so many other real serious issues.
Yeah, I mean, there was the other Prop 66, which would have expedited executions. That one's ahead by just a little bit. I'm a little skeptical it's going to pass. We still have about 3 million ballots to count. A lot of them are from LA. But, the death penalty is a funny thing. I mean, California's been split down the middle on that. And I think a lot of folks, even if they aren't wild about the death penalty, they want to reserve it for what they perceive as the worst of the worst. The Scott Petersons, the Richard Allen Davises, the Hillside Stranglers, those really high-profile crimes, cop killers, they want to have that option, even if it never really gets put into place.
Here's an interesting schism you may find with the Democrat, growing majority. is a schism between Latinos and maybe liberal Bay Area Democrats. I talked to Rod Pacheco, who was the former district attorney down in Riverside County, which is one of the top counties that send people to the death chamber, and he believes that there are a number of Latinos that are very strong on the justice and criminal order issue, and he thinks that that tough on law and order actually is a message that will resonate with Latinos on an ongoing basis.
Although, as an exception to that, according to the field poll anyway, the number of Latinos supporting the legalization of marijuana was way up from the last time it was on the ballot. So, you know, that's a community that's in transition as well. But I agree with you. There is a strong law and order element there.
Well, speaking of marijuana, so California passed it, Massachusetts and Nevada also passed, and so now they join 4 other states, right, in addition to Washington, D.C., where it is legal. Is this part of a national movement that may be spreading as well, despite Trump's victory?
It sure seems to be. And, you know, it's not exclusively a Democratic issue. There are a lot of libertarians. There are some Republicans like Dana Rohrabacher down south, who's for a long time advocated legalizing or decriminalizing marijuana. You know, I think if you have somebody who's a family member who's had cancer, you've sort of become comfortable with the idea of medicinal marijuana, it's not that far to get to legalizing it. And I think there's also a sense in the country, and certainly in California, that the war on drugs failed, and that locking people up for pot possession was really not a great thing to do.
But a federal ban is still in place. So how is this all going to work out under a Trump presidency and Republicans in control of the House and Senate as well?
That's a fascinating point, because these states have been ignoring federal law for a long time, and the Congress has opted not to do anything about it, nor, since we've had Democrats in the White House for the past 8 years, have opted not to do anything about it. That said, if Rudy Giuliani is the Attorney General for the United States of America, it's very interesting to see how he will respond or react to this issue. I don't know if that's a fight Donald Trump wants to take on, and quite candidly, if he does, maybe somebody comes up with a video of him, you know, in his youthful indiscretions. Who knows? But there is a chance that the federal government could put their hammer down pretty hard.
But there is a way that this can benefit those who are pro-legalization, in the sense that the ideology of conservatism certainly supports the notion of localism, local control, states' rights. And so in order to be consistent, they would have to sort of defer to the local California leaders.
Okay, want to take a moment to talk about some local races as well. Kamala Harris, as we know, won the U.S. Senate seat. In the state Senate race between Scott Wiener and Jane Kim in San Francisco, Kim lost the momentum she got from the primary with a Bernie Sanders bump. Wiener won. What happened?
Well, I think because, you know, that in June, that was a hot topic, you know, with Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton. That went away in November, and, you know, he endorsed her. She was one of just, I think, 4 local candidates that he endorsed in the whole country. But that, you know, the burn kind of subsided a little bit.
Came back.
And you'd think with a larger turnout in November that she might have done even better as the more liberal of the 2 candidates. But, you know, it just didn't play out that way.
And it affected the whole city now, because the city council, the supervisors, are clearly in a more centrist position than they were last week.
One quick thing about Kamala Harris, who obviously won easily, I think because the Democrats have, if you look at the bench nationwide, there aren't a lot of up-and-coming Democrats. And I think Kamala Harris, even more so than she would have, will be seen as a rising star in the way perhaps that Barack Obama, Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren were when they got there. And I think whoever becomes governor of California in 2019 also could be, depending on who it is, could have an elevated role in the leadership of the National Democratic Party because of this like dearth of people in the pipeline.
Let's turn to the Ro Khanna, Mike Khanna race in Silicon Valley really quickly before we run out of time, because we've been following it all along. Both Democrats, Khanna beat Honda after Honda has spent 16 years in his post. What will Khanna do that's different from what Mike Honda has done?
All he has to do is pretty much get up in the morning, to be honest with you. I mean, Honda has one of the
Say what you really think, Sean.
poorest records of any legislative success of any member in Congress. I mean, it is unbelievable. I think he has one bill that's actually ever passed. To me, it's a minor miracle the man has actually survived in office that long, plus the controversy with his staff and ethics issues, and it's just stunning to me that it
And it was a
took
bit
this
of a
long.
blowout. He won, I think, got 60% of the vote, Khanna did, so it wasn't close.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen.
Yes.
Always too much to discuss in too little time, as usual. Sean Walsh, James Taylor, and Scott Shafer, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Politics is also a frequent theme in the arts world. Current Bay Area arts events are showcasing stories of resistance and struggle, from an edgy circus in Oakland to hip-hop and dance. Joining me now is KQED Senior Arts Editor Chloe Veltman to talk about the latest arts offerings. Hi, Chloe. Always good to see you.
Hello, Twee. It's nice to be here.
Well, the election's still very much on people's minds, and in Oakland, politics is playing a main role in an unlikely place, the circus. Tell us about that.
That's right. It's not very often that circus and politics join forces, but there's a show that runs at the KQED Arts Center through December the 18th. It's called Inversion, Circus Disobedience, and it's all about civil disobedience and sticking it to the man. There's a bunch of characters involved in this show, tricksters, punks, hippies, and they all go through their own personal revolutions, and then there's a bigger revolution. And it's a combination of acrobatics and great clowning. Really makes you think and laugh.
That's wonderful. It looks great. Well, from the circus to dance theater, writer and performer Mark Bamuti has a new dance theater piece out. Sounds like politics are a big part of that piece of work, too.
Indeed, Twee. This is a show that's called pelota. That word in Spanish means ball, but it refers to the game of soccer, which is, of course, a global phenomenon. And it's had positive impacts on society and some negative impacts too. And Mark Bamuti Joseph himself grew up as a Haitian immigrant. He grew up playing the sport. He's obsessed with it. And he's created this show that's at the intersection of hip hop, spoken word, dance, that really digs into some of these issues to do with the role that soccer plays in global economies and politics.
And I think we have a clip from that, right?
Let's check out a clip from a rehearsal.
And beyond the show, Joseph works with Bay Area youth in soccer, and he's quite a local treasure. He's been recognized by the United States Artists Rockefeller Fellowship in his annual list of the 50 greatest living artists.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's a tremendous artist and a tremendous activist. And as part of this show, he's doing this big outreach with youth soccer clinics and kind of helping young people connect the dots between the game and politics on a global scale.
All right, and that is through Sunday, November 20th, right?
That's right, the 18th to the 20th at the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts.
And all right, let's move to the South Bay. MACLA is a space and San Jose's main hub for Latino arts and culture, and they're presenting a series of concerts by a really extraordinary Puerto Rican-born Latin neo-soul singer.
That's right. She's called Sandra Anton Giorgi, and she's performing a series of concerts, as you say, this weekend at MACLA. She's got this great voice. It's warm and it's sultry, and she covers such themes as her Puerto Rican heritage and peace and healing. We actually have her part of her submission for NPR's Tiny Desk competition. Should we take a listen?
Yes. Very sultry. She's also quite a talented painter.
That's right. She is a muralist. In her hometown of Chicago, she's created this wonderful mural called Weaving Cultures, which is also deeply political, working in collaboration with another female artist, Sam Kirk. It's really quite a splendid images of this sort of line of women of different ethnicities.
And yeah, we're seeing her at work now, and she works also with the Chicago public school system, so very, very involved in her community.
That's right.
All right, it is Veterans Day, and this weekend, the 5th edition of the San Francisco Veterans Film Festival is kicking off, and it's devoted really to narrative and documentary films exploring the topic of war. Yeah,
that's exactly right, and I'd love for us to check out one particular film. There are lots of great offerings, of course, this year, but let's take a quick look at Tango in the Balcony. It's a fictional short by Minos Pappas, and it explores this Iraqi war veteran who's dealing with PTSD.
You had a weapon, a detonator, something. Were you one of those kids selling cigarettes and junk on the street? Did you go to school?
Don't know.
How do I know you're telling the truth? Why were you home that day?
You don't know.
And this is at the San Francisco Public Main Library branch?
That's right, this weekend.
Okay, any charge?
No, it's free.
Okay, well, that is a great way to wrap up the week, and happy Veterans Day to you.
Happy Veterans Day to you too, Twee.
All right, thank you so much, Chloe.
Thank you.
Well, let's turn out to the sports world. Hall of Fame quarterback Steve Young captivated football fans during his 13 seasons with the San Francisco 49ers. Despite his success, though, he struggled with anxiety, both on and off the field, even as a kid. Scott Shafer spoke with him about his new memoir, QB, My Life Behind the Spiral.
Steve Young, welcome to Newsroom.
Thank you very much.
This book, Quarterback QB, My Life Behind the Spiral, has a lot of football in it, but it also has a lot of off-the-field stuff about you, the person, a lot of dealing with anxiety and vulnerabilities. Why did you decide to write that kind of book?
I was unnerved when my kids were growing up and hearing stories at school, and they'd come home and say, Dad, I heard this or heard that, and it was not right. And I thought to myself, I've got to
tell your story
to them, you know. And so I hired Jeff Benedict to literally just put a narrative together, call my teammates, talk to me a ton, talk to my family, talk to people in my life, and I want to give something to my children. And so that's what we did.
What kind of stories were they hearing that were wrong?
Well, I mean, it was like inevitably it was something about Joe Montana, and that we fought. I heard that you punched him, and like just the idea that you would think that I would do that, or that we had a fight because we never did. Despite all of the people who thought that it was so hard, it was never toxic. It was always positive to our play. So it was stuff that I wanted to at least say, look, as you grow up and as you get older and people say, oh, I heard this about your dad, that you can go back and say, well, my dad told me that it was this way.
So much of this, at least at the beginning and throughout the book, is about your anxiety, separation anxiety as a kid. And it really wasn't, you weren't, until you were an adult that you really understood what was going on. Talk about that process and what it meant to you.
I remember my younger brothers and sisters. I had 4 younger brothers and sisters. My parents went out of town in 2nd grade, and I was like beside myself, wailing and I remember one of my younger sister was like, "What's wrong with Steve?" And I still remember her saying that, like, I don't know what's wrong with Steve, but Steve is really struggling. And I think that if you take that experience, and that's a genetic thing that I didn't know, and just that, now I know it's in my mom's family and sprinkled around and different, and even, one of my sons might have a little touch of this, that not knowing and living through all the things that happen, but it informs so much of what happens. I actually chose a profession where you go in front of 80,000 people and not only that, but I'm going to go try to replace Jim McMahon in college, who had 73 NCAA records, and Joe Montana as a pro. Oh yeah, that'll be great. This is a perfect combination. This will go well.
How much of the anxiety was fueled by that sort of thing?
Of course that was a piece of it, but I suspect that mine was always, 3 iterations higher. People who knew what my story was would come to me, Steve, I know you kind of had this, my son is struggling, and what would you say? And the first thing I tell him is, you will never completely understand it. It will not rationalize to you, so that you need to know that you can't say, like my dad, oh, just
get through it.
Get through it. But by getting through it over and over and over and over again through my whole life, by the end of my career, by going through it, I think my dad was right. It really was fun. It waned, and I think that's why I wanted to keep playing, because I was having, for the first time, so much fun.
Because you wanted to play. You're very competitive. What was it that finally convinced you to give it up?
One thing my dad said, he said, Steve, is it the 19th season that's the vital? Is it that vital that you have this 19th season? And I remember thinking, probably not that vital. So that started to inform my decision about, and then a lot of people in the Bay Area, and I mean a lot, would come up to me and, like only the Italian grandmother, like almost grab me by the face and just say, Steve, no more. And I wanted to say, don't worry, it's okay, I'm fine. But it would almost disrespect how they were feeling. And so that was another thing that was part of it. And another big part of it was that the 49ers had become such a part of who I was that I couldn't really imagine playing for somebody else. And I was having so much fun playing for the first time. It wasn't the anxiety, the anxiety had waned, and I was really enjoying it. So that was all, putting that all in the middle was the final tough decision to just say no more.
Of course, you were in a quarterback competition with Joe Montana. There's another one now between Blaine Gabbert and Colin Kaepernick. What's your take about how all that affects a team on and off the field?
If you say that Blaine Gabbert and Colin Kaepernick together can be toxic, then you've got to stop that. You can't have toxic things in your locker room. I don't know that, it seems to like both of these guys aren't.
What about the anthem?
I think Colin has worked, I think he did a good job of communicating with the team. They brought themselves together. Chip Kelly, the head coach, seems to have communicated, and they've kind of come to a place where they're all together on that. And so that's the key, because the locker room it's like it's nation unto itself. Like there's certain laws, there's a constitution, and it's very tender and precious. Yeah. And great locker rooms are hard to find, and toxic relationships crater teams all the time. You talk a lot in the book about your Mormon faith. You are actually the great-great-great-grandson of Brigham Young. Yeah, crazy. Right? And you don't drink. You really follow all the tenets of your Mormon faith. And yet, you and your wife have really gotten involved in LGBT gay family issues. Yes. Why? It's making sure that we fulfill the full measure of what we're promising, that we can do this together. I think the theology is that we're all in it together, and I think that more than anything, it's an effort to make sure that we reach out and do all that we can. And so I think that's, I credit my wife with giving me that sense of passion for it, because the spiritual warriorship that I see in our LGBT brothers and sisters it really is an inspiration. Your life, it seems, could have taken a different course. Your mom didn't want you to play football. You were a very good pitcher, and you played basketball as well. You get to BYU, you're number 8 on the depth chart. It could have turned out very differently. You ever think about that and what that other path might have looked like? There's a moment in the book where I'm finishing with college, and playing was always such a difficulty, and dealing with the feelings of anxiety. Is like, Steve, don't go pro. And then there's this moment when the Cincinnati Bengals are in town to work me out because they have the first draft pick. And there's a moment when I say to myself, yeah, don't go pro. And then I look into the stadium, I'm like, no, we're going pro. So there's this part of me that craves and loves challenge and what's the next mountain? Let's go climb it. Let's go do it. And so the good news is that no matter what I chose, I was always looking for the next thing to climb, despite the rigor of some of these other things that I had a feeling for. So I don't think, even if my mom would have won early, I think I would have found something to go climb. Yeah. All right. Steve Young, the book is called QB, My Life Behind the Spiral. Thanks so much for coming in. Pleasure. Thanks so much.
And before we go, we would like to thank our veterans for their service to our country. Happy Veterans Day, everyone. For all of KQED's news coverage, please go to kqednews.org. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks so much for watching.